No, you're good.
Yeah.
This helps me keep a conversational voice.
Perfect. Okay, it's recording now.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Ask Bucky Unfiltered. This is a webcast that seeks to bring relevant information to UW students around campus. My name is Allie Weber, and I am one of the special projects interns that work for the Department of Campus and Visitor Relations. I'll have Janan introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Janan. I'm also a special projects intern with Campus and Visitor Relations.
And since this is our first webcast that we will be releasing in November, Janan and I are very excited to kick off a series of webcasts that focus on Native American Heritage Month, or as many of us know it, Native November. So today we are thrilled to welcome Erin Birdbear, the university's first travel relations director. So thank you, Erin, so much for taking the time out of your day to be here with us. How are you?
I'm doing very well, so thank you for asking. And I know it's a troubling time. It's very difficult for everyone to negotiate our health, safety, and well-being of ourselves and our loved ones. So I hope everyone else is doing as well as one can, considering the circumstances.
And now, Erin, just for our audience members who may not quite know who you are, could you explain a little bit more about your position, what it is, how long you've worked with the university, just a little bit more of like the logistical side?
Okay. Hanishada Haipi, Erin Birdbear Gahini Gaide. And I just said in a very proud way, I'm happy to be here. My name is Erin Birdbear. In the Ho-Chunk language, the people of the big voice, the people of the sacred voice, their language is so important to this continent. And so as a guest here in the Western Great Lakes, I always want to acknowledge whose ancestral and or treaty lands I'm living on. And I happen to be living and working in Daejeop, 4 Lakes, the ancestral and sacred lands of the Ho-Chunk Nation. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that and say hello in their language. It's always good to understand and hear Indigenous knowledge in its own language. And I'm a member of the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara Nation, which is what is now known as North Dakota. So I'm a guest here in the Western Great Lakes as the inaugural Tribal Relations Director. But I've been working at the University of Wisconsin-Madison for 20 years. So the year 2000 is when I began working. And I initially supported American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian students on campus, trying to support their retention and graduation. So when they came to our institution, hopefully they're having positive and meaningful experiences that help them grow as learners. I then became an assistant dean in the School of Education. So I kind of supervised and looked over programming supporting pre-college, undergraduate, and graduate students. And then lastly, I become the inaugural Tribal Relations Director at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And although my appointment began in 2019, I unfortunately had to take an extended period of leave. And so I've only began this position in March 2020. So I'm about 6 or 7 months into this new position.
And was there anything that led you to become the first Tribal Relations Director at Madison?
Yeah, a really amazing story. In 1914, the 4th Annual Society of American Indians Conference was hosted at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And importantly, it's important to remember in 1914, Native Americans were not U.S. citizens. We were still citizens of our own governments and countries. The American Indian Citizenship Act was still a decade away. And so Indigenous leaders did gather at the University of Wisconsin-Madison over 4 days discussing kind of the importance of what kind of a future should they advocate for as leaders. You know, should we advocate for assimilation into U.S. society? Should we advocate for maintaining our own tribal governments and structures and languages? And so just really powerful conversations in 1914, a long time ago. Then fast forward to 2015, 101 years later, is the second time the university hosted tribal leaders on its campus. But in 2015, it was not general tribal leaders through hosting a national conference of Indigenous leaders through the Society of American Indians at the time. In 2015, it was specifically just the 12 Native nations of Wisconsin. And so importantly, our institution, thinking about its long-term relationships with Native nations, we hosted the leaders for the first time collectively as a group to discuss our relationships between their nations and our institution. So that was really exciting. And it kind of catapulted this effort called the Native Nations UW effort, where we're thinking about our partnerships and collaborations, because we're such a decentralized university that we often have no idea what's happening around campus. So how can we understand and better coordinate our efforts to understand and serve the needs of Native Americans? So 2015, a wonderful summit. Out of that came this working group, Native Nations UW. It was a recommendation that was put forward to create a tribal relations or a tribal liaison position at the institution. And so that's how it came to be. And I applied to the position since I'd worked on campus for 20 years. And I'd created something called the First Nations Cultural Landscape Tour in 2003, where we kind of interrogate and understand how American Indian history and policy is built into the very fabric of our institution, whether it be thousands, 3,000-year-old archaeological sites or a contemporary building showcasing contemporary Indigenous culture. So we really just kind of showcase that. And through that experience of kind of understanding our place and understanding the environment, I got to know so many people because I gave hundreds, like we've given over 1,000 of the First Nation cultural landscape tours since 2003. And in particular, it was a place of professional development for faculty and staff. So faculty departments, groups of researchers would request a tour. And so I just built a depth of relationships over the campus over 17 years of giving the tour. And I thought I could leverage those relationships to think about how we could meet and address the needs, priorities, and interests shared by Native nations. That might be a mutual benefit to Native nations and the university. So that's how I came to be in this position. It was a national search, and so there were a lot of people who applied, and I think the university wanted to try to leverage the relationships that I've had broadly across campus that might enhance and meet the priorities and interests shared with us by Native nations.
That's awesome to hear, and really cool to share that history. I didn't know that many tours were given since you started, so that's awesome. I guess I was kind of curious about, who did you see as mentors, or who did you look for guidance when, starting this position?
Well, I'm really fortunate that we have about 20 tribal relations offices across the United States at different universities. And, I always jokingly call this person the Dean of American Indian Student Support Services. Karen Francis Begay at the University of Arizona elevated the position supporting Native American students at the University of Arizona to a position of a special advisor to their president. And kind of realizing that if you really want to serve Native nations well, and that how we treat and how the experience goes for Native American students at our university is one of the most important relationship pieces we have. So how their tribal citizens experience our institution, how we take care of them when they're in our care, is super important. And so Karen Francis Begay took this position serving the American Indian students at the University of Arizona and elevated it to a really important kind of advice and consultation position, supporting their university leadership. So that happened a long time ago, like 20 years ago. And other institutions similarly kind of started their efforts 20 years ago in terms of tribal relations or tribal liaisons. And so for me, the mentorship or leadership model comes from my peers who are in tribal relations or tribal liaisons at universities across the United States. And since we're one of the newest institutions on the block to institute or to create tribal relations positions, the University of Minnesota created one last year. We created one last year. That we look to our more established tribal relations, tribal liaisons units across the United States to give us guidance. And the University of Arizona has been very fundamental to understanding how these positions can work. The University of Washington, Seattle has a highly developed tribal relations position. The University of Oklahoma. So we think about these big states with large Research One universities, meaning the highest level of research is accomplished by an institution. And so that's a very important consideration for relationships and how they go forward compared to like a liberal arts college, which is really focused on teaching and learning of youth. So something to think about is, the peers and the mentorship and the strategy for this work has been pioneered for over 2 decades. And us newer universities who are joining the cohort of tribal relations or tribal liaisons have a lot of bedrock to look for support of how we continue our work going forward.
That's awesome that we have, universities to look towards, and I hope that, UW, as being the flagship university in Wisconsin, can, be that leader for more universities in the area. So could you tell us a little bit more about what you do in your role? Are there any projects that are currently in the works?
Yeah, the most important part of this position, right, and we talked about a little bit about it, about how we receive and support the tribal citizens that come from the 12 First Nations of Wisconsin. That's a really important part of our relationship. But the director ultimately, like the director of federal relations, the director of state relations, the director of community relations, the Office of Business Engagement, these are the units that are part of the Office of University Relations. So relationships are thinking about how we understand one another, how we can support one another, how we can communicate with one another. And so fundamentally, these positions, tribal relations director or tribal liaisons, are to advance tribal partnerships. That's the goal. And to raise awareness of tribal governance and culture at our institution so that people who want to engage tribal leaders understand they're very unique compared to other populations in that we have treaty-based relationships with the federal government. Politically, we're not actually racial minorities under U.S. law. We're political minorities under U.S. law. That's been the Supreme Court and the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Two Supreme Court of the United States and our local Supreme Court in the state of Wisconsin have both affirmed that we're political citizens, political minorities, and not racialized minorities, although we become racialized. So it's important to raise awareness of tribal governance and culture at our institutions so that we understand how to better partner with them. We got to think about strategic engagement opportunities, whether they are like this morning, we had the Native Nations UW Tribal Advisory Council fall meeting where representatives from the 12 First Nations share with us kind of their interests, needs, and priorities, and we hopefully can keep that memory collectively and that we don't lose their priorities and interests and that we can be responsive to them. I'm also I'm charged with creating and managing a collaborative effort, so I don't do it all by myself. Very rarely do people do things by themselves at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. The Wisconsin way, we kind of jokingly call it the Wisconsin way, is just go do something and tell us when it works. So go find collaborators, use your expertise, use your relational abilities to find key partners that might help an idea go forward. And so the charge is to collaboratively improve a collaborative effort to improve the structure through which UW-Madison and tribal governments communicate on matters of shared concern. And right now, I mentioned we have the Tribal Advisory Council through the Native Nations UW effort. But that is a Tribal Advisory Council that's just a really important conduit for information for us right now. It supports my office. It supports the efforts to possibly develop a research center that's kind of co-created with Indigenous nations in some way. We mentioned that we're a research institution, and that's really a fundamental part of how we contribute to the world is by creating new knowledge, or we're working on vaccines right now for COVID-19. We're doing all sorts of efforts to improve the well-being of humans on planet Earth. And so thinking about how we can create collaborative opportunities to get communication to these key stakeholders across institutions is really important. So we need to formalize a little bit of this communication structure, and that's how the Tribal Advisory Council is situated and functions. Do tribal nations want to pursue memorandum of understanding, which clarify how we're going to communicate, when we're going to communicate, how we'll resolve any differences we might come upon with each other. So the memorandums of understanding are often tools used to formalize communication. So we're still discussing, we discussed a little bit about that today, about how do we continue to improve our collaborative effort for communication between tribal nations and the institution. And then lastly, it's like just really promoting alignments. It's like reminding people the Native Nations have shared with us their interests and needs and priorities in 2016 and 2019. So shortly after that 2015 summit, the first time we hosted tribal leaders in over 100 years on our campus, out of that came this kind of listening session where we went to their tribal nations. We sent representatives from UW to hear their interests, needs, and concerns. And those kind of listening sessions from 2016 and 2019 still guide our work today. They told us what they hope we kind of can focus on. And my job is to promote alignments and remind people, okay, the tribe shared with us what they want. We just have to remember that and think about how we can be responsive collectively as an institutional community.
Now, Aaron, I think you probably talked about this earlier in your introduction. Could you maybe go a little bit more in depth on why there was a need for the creation of this position?
Yeah, the creation of the position, right? I mentioned that we're not the first tribal nations or tribal nations office created in the United States. Native American nations through incredible agency, incredible sophistication, and incredible strategy, survived the 20th century. The 20th century was so hard for us. In the beginning of the 20th century, there were only 237,000 Native Americans alive in the United States. So there used to be 6 million of us, and we lost 95% of our population through disease, warfare, colonization, assimilation, termination, all these really horrific policies that negatively impacted Native nations. So 120 years ago, there was 237,000 Native Americans alive in the United States. And so myself and every other Native American descended from that group, really owe it to their sophistication, their agency, and their brilliance in not only maintaining tribal sovereignty, despite our kind of being on the precipice of really low numbers and trying to sustain tribal culture and traditional knowledge, that we've been able to make it through the 20th century, that grinder of assimilation and termination, and come out the other side. And now that Native Americans have stronger economies and diversified economies, that we're just really kind of novel and important collaborators to think about innovation. Tribal knowledge in particular is just so important about how we understand this continent, that has knowledge that has been built over thousands and thousands of years. So if you're a university who's focused on creating knowledge as a research institution, you probably don't want to ignore this incredible knowledge base that tribal nations have been able to rebuild and sustain, despite the 20th century being such a difficult century in terms of beginning at such low numbers, facing almost a quarter century of attempt to eradicate our language and cultures. And so now that Native Americans can rely on our cultures and languages for the last 40 years, we've rebounded and revitalized in such amazing ways that it's this really robust partnerships can form with this kind of continually strengthening and continually rebuilding Native nations after a really traumatic period for us in the last 200 years in the 19th and 20th century. We're pretty difficult centuries for us. So looking forward, and the challenges we all face collectively as humans on planet Earth, I think we see that tribal knowledge and traditional knowledge can enhance research, can enhance our understanding of the planet. We just have to do it in ways that are appropriate and respectful of traditional knowledge, of tribal knowledge. And so accomplishing that will take a little bit of work for us to understand how to do good research with indigenous nations, because it's new and tribal nations have their own protocols and ways of being for engaging research, and we need to respect those. So I think, just tribes themselves, Native nations have become increasingly successful and increasingly able to provide all sorts of structure for us. A reminder that in 11 counties in Wisconsin, tribal nations are the largest employer. So 11 out of 72 counties, tribal nations are the largest employer in those counties. So they're significant contributors to the economy. And I think that's kind of one of the driving reasons that we, in the 21st century, so many universities across the United States are engaged with tribal nations in the ways of research, teaching, and service.
Yeah. So earlier you started talking about kind of the communications that happened in 2016 and 2019 and previous to that as well. But we know that in 2019 we saw the reveal of the Our Shared Future plaque. Could you tell us a little bit more about that plaque, what it represents, kind of the work that went into it and how you contributed to it?
Okay. In 2016, the Associated Students of Madison passed a resolution asking for us to discuss and share information about the intersections between university or American leaders and indigenous nations. Like, how do we explain that more clearly? And so the Committee on Native American Campus Signage was formed to think about how we can translate this information about the indigeneity of this space, this 12,000-year human story. I hope our students know you're in one of the most special places on our continent, just an incredibly culturally specific, special place. 12,000 years of humanity on our campus. Really robust indigenous cultures over thousands and thousands of years. Like Lakeshore dorms are on 3,000-year-old village sites. Natatorium's near an 8,000-year-old village site. Eagle Heights is an 8,000-year-old village site. So what an incredibly special place it is. And so when we think about can you repeat the beginning of the question? I just need to attack back to it. Specialness of this place got me all excited.
Yeah, I was asking kind of about prior you were talking about like the communications y'all have had with the First Nations and making sure what
Oh,
their
Our Shared Future Heritage
yeah.
Marker. Here we go.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in the specialness, the university wanted us to be able to convey this specialness in some way. And so the Committee on Native American Campus Signage was formed so that we could figure out where can we share this, how do we share it, what's the most appropriate messages to share. And we then began a long discussion with the Ho-Chunk Nation because we're on their ancestral and treaty lands as an institution. And we discussed with the Ho-Chunk because they opened their own Ho-Chunk Museum in Tomah, Wisconsin, and they're thinking about opening a heritage center here somewhere in this south central region. And so the Ho-Chunk themselves were thinking deeply about what are the first most important messages to share with non-Ho-Chunk, because I'm not Ho-Chunk, right? I'm just like anybody else. I'm not indigenous to the Western Great Lakes. So if your ancestors and people aren't indigenous to Western Great Lakes, you know, I'm in that lump. I'm in that category. You know, I have to learn about these people. I have to know these people's interests. So we asked the Ho-Chunk, and they went through great deliberation to work about 5 themes they think are important for non-Ho-Chunk or non-indigenous people to know. Or I'm sorry, not non-Ho, for Ho-Chunk and non-Ho-Chunk people to know. That all of us should know this kind of information about how special this place is. And so one of their first messages was they wanted us to discuss the really interruption to their culture, the interruption to the ecosystem that's here, which is the colonization of Dejope, the transformation of Dejope into Madison, and the eradication of the Baroque savanna that they had created over thousands of years of fire ecology. So their culture is deeply connected to how they stewarded this land for such a long period of time. And so the Our Shared Future Heritage Marker wanted to tell that story about, okay, there was an interruption here. There was a conflict and contest for this space. And it's greatly shaped the contemporary Ho-Chunk Nation and contemporary U.S. society, contemporary Madison, contemporary Wisconsin society. You know, these policies and these actions that we did at this time. And so the Ho-Chunk really wanted to tell the story of from 1832 to 1874, when the United States engaged in 6 military campaigns to attempt to forcibly remove the Ho-Chunk from Wisconsin. And that this was the Ho-Chunk's deep connection to this place, the specialness culturally of this space, the sacredness of this space to them. It's an incredible love story of connection to space. And despite the U.S.'s best attempt to remove the Ho-Chunk, that was unsuccessful. The Ho-Chunk thwarted those attempts through all sorts of different means, led by a gentleman named Roaring Thunder, also known as Dandy, an incredible leader in the Ho-Chunk Nation. So Our Shared Future, we thought, okay, since the Ho-Chunk said this is a really important message to share, it's something we should share. And it took us a while to draft that message because we had to do it in collaboration with the Ho-Chunk Nation. And it was exciting when the Our Shared Future Heritage Marker was installed in Bascom Hill in June of 2019. The entire Ho-Chunk Nation legislature and the Ho-Chunk Nation executive attended that installation with Chancellor Blank and other university leaders. So us telling the truth, telling the truth about the contest for this space, telling the really kind of messiness of colonization, it's our first steps toward reconciliation. You can't have reconciliation without truth. And so some of the truth telling that the Our Shared Future Heritage Marker accomplished about our complicated relationship with the Ho-Chunk today, that has to do with a lot of violence that happened in the 19th century, is something that we still have to account for as an institution. So I think it was a really wonderful step for us as an institution to do. We still have more signs to make. And it took us a long time to get the first one because, well, what should be shared? Who should share it? How should it be shared? The Ho-Chunk have very different kind of culture and worldview for sharing information than we do. They don't do signs. They don't do kind of the things that we do to convey information is not how the Ho-Chunk would want to convey the information. So how to be respectful of their culture and information sharing, at the same time illuminating the incredible specialness of the campus that we are fortunate to call our institution. And I'm an alumni of UW-Madison, so it is my institution as well. And just important for us to do so. So at least that helps with the Our Shared Future Heritage Marker. It's one of like 18 heritage markers on Bascom Hill. So there's one in front of the Union, there's one by Music Hall, there's one by South Hall. So there's numerous of these markers on the hill, and this is just one more addition to help us understand the space and teach our community about this space in some way.
And Aaron, I just have one more quick question for you. If any of our audience would like to learn more about First Nations, here in Wisconsin particularly, what resources should they go to find that information?
Yeah, there's easy ones. The one that one can remember quickly is just the word wisconsinfirstnations.org. So Wisconsin First Nations, all one word, just wisconsinfirstnations.org. was designed for K-12 educators to teach about Native Americans. There's a state expectation to teach the history, culture, and tribal sovereignty of the 12 American Indian nations of Wisconsin at least once in elementary, or at least twice in elementary and at least once in high school. So we have to equip our teachers with the resources. And so WisconsinFirstNations.org collected all the resources created in collaboration with the Native Nations of Wisconsin to feature them. So that'd be a starting point. And that place will connect you to Wisconsin Public Television has a Tribal Histories Project where they have a 25-minute featurette on each of the tribal nations of Wisconsin, telling their own story in their own words. So really powerful short videos. TheWays.org similarly has 5-minute snippet stories about the First Nations of Wisconsin, contemporary First Nations of Wisconsin, explicit focus on contemporary Indigenous peoples. American Indian Studies in the Department of Public Instruction has a wonderful website. The Newberry Library has Indians of the Midwest, an incredible web resource at the Darcy McNichol Center for American Indian Studies. So I know they're not all in one place, and one would have to kind of know how special the McNichol Center is in its American Indian Studies collection, or that these resources exist for K-12 educators, but they're all out there, and hopefully we'll be able to present them in a place where people can access these resources quickly and easily. Now, I know where they're aggregated, but not everybody does, right? So a lot of great resources, but if you're just at a starting point, WisconsinFirstNations.org will connect you to a lot of resources.
Yeah,
and I'm sorry for interrupting you, but WisconsinFirstNations.org was created here at the University of Wisconsin School of Education. So it's one of our products to help educators fulfill this expectation to teach the history, culture, tribal sovereignty of the Native American nations of Wisconsin.
Yeah, no worries. I was just going to say we can leave these links in the description of our video too, so people can also look it up and have it all listed there for them. Yeah, I know I'm going to have to check out a few of those. I wasn't aware of, like even WisconsinFirstNations.org. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Aaron. I know Allie and I are really excited to kind of bring this information out to our students and to our campus. And yeah, so this has been the Ask Bucky Unfiltered webcast with our focus on Native November, and we'll post these every Sunday. So yeah, have a great rest of your day, and thank you, Aaron, for joining us.
All right, one last thing I'd like to teach. If you're a student, yeah. And if you're a student and you want to say a respectful thank you, as you would to a teacher, so maybe your faculty member or your teaching assistant, or someone helping you in some way, in a way that's very meaningful to you. There's a respectful thank you that the Ho-Chunk have. And you say, Wa'ina ge napshina. Wa'ina ge napshina. Wa'ina ge napshina. So thank you to both of you for trying to educate our campus community about different folks. And it's a way that anyone can say a respectful thank you to someone that's teaching them something or helping them share something important. The common thank you is just pinagigi. Pinagigi was just like, thanks, thank you. So I say Wa'ina ge napshina to you in this effort to educate our community. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Aaron.